Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video where we'll be going through the solution to the first assignment of COMP9321. I'm your presenter Blake Ambrose, so let's get started. To provide a general overview of the assignment for students who haven't already taken the course, the task was to create a simple dynamic website based on JSPs and servlets, where users have the ability to search a list of publications sourced from an XML file and then add and remove these from their shopping cart. In solving this problem, I've split up the video into four main components. The first is parsing the publications from an XML file. As we are dealing with Java, it is important that we parse this XML into Java objects, also known as beans, so we can send them through to the JSPs. Secondly, we'll be implementing a control servlet to handle the post and get requests from the user. For simplicity's sake, we'll be following the front controller design pattern when crafting this. Thirdly, we'll go through implementing search. So this will be things like form submission, parameter passing, and pagination. And lastly, we'll be looking at handling sessions for creating a shopping cart. So let's start with reading from an XML file. When reading from an XML file, Java already gives us two options, the DOM parser and the sax parser. With the DOM parser, we read the entirety of the XML file into a tree-like structure. This makes it easy for keeping the structure of the XML intact and provides easy-to-use APIs when querying and converting this data into Java objects. However, be wary of file sizes, as if the XML file is too large, this can cause out-of-memory exceptions. Now, with the sax parser, which we'll be using in this video, is an event-driven parser where small portions of the XML file are read one at a time, and when we encounter opening or closing tags, we perform certain actions. With this type of parser, we use far less memory than the DOM parser. So let's take a look at how we'll implement the sax parser in this video. The following code demonstrates on how you will implement the parser. So to start off with, we first create a class, which I call sax parser, and we make it implement the content handler. So after doing that, what I've done is I've created an additional class which contains tag type. And what tag type is essentially the list of the different tags and attributes which we'll encounter during the XML processing scheme. We have three different enums in this class. Tag type is essentially all the different tags that we will encounter. Tag object type are the different objects, so article, in proceedings, etc., etc. And the last one, which is the attribute tag, so they basically describe the tag objects. So jumping back, we have this thing called DTT entry. So this will be the current object that we're processing at the moment. So if we jump inside that, so this will be the bean representing our object. So as you can see, the bean's fairly simple. It's just containing a map, which is essentially a string mapped to a list of strings. We have the constructor, which initializes this map and puts in the name. We have this get attribute, which essentially just gets the attribute from the map. For attribute, essentially puts in an attribute. Get attribute string. So what this does is that, given the key, this will collect. This essentially converts a list of strings into one very long string, which we can use for searching later on, which I'll discuss further in this video. So jumping back, we have this array list of DTT entry, so this will be basically all the currently processed objects that we have found. We have the constructor, which essentially initializes this array list, reads in the file location of the XML file, and basically just calls the parser and sets everything in motion. So going down, we can ignore characters and start document. If we look at start element, this is mainly concerned with the object tag type. So these are the things like articles and books, where if we encounter any one of those, we want to create a new DTT entry, and we also want to put the key into the entry itself. So the key will serve as a primary key. So we look further down, we have this method called end element, and this is where most of the magic happens. So we first set our closing tag, so this will be used in the switch statement. So if we look at the switch statement, we have around about four different sections. The first section will be concerned about the object tag type. So when we encounter any one of these, we just want to add the DDT entry into the array list, saying that we've done pass that object. In the case of all the attributes, we want to put those attributes and the contents into the currently processed object that we're currently going through. So we'll just do that. The DPLP, this signifies that we've basically finished passing all the entries, and the unidentified section is this if we encounter any tag that doesn't sort of fit any of these above criteria. So once we finish that, we have end document, which essentially just prints out the parsing is ended, and that's essentially how the sax parser works. So now we've reached to setting up the control servlet. So the primary function of the control servlet is to handle all the incoming and outgoing requests by the user. As mentioned before, we'll be using the front controller pattern as seen in the diagram, which works on the basis on that we have one controller or servlet which directs all the incoming and outgoing requests. So the advantage of using such a pattern is that this provides a centralized entry point for handling all incoming and outgoing requests, making it very easy to configure as we're only changing one class at a time, and makes it very easy to set up. However, one of the drawbacks to this solution is scalability. Once we start adding more and more functionality, the complexity of code increases by tenfold, and we soon find it quite hard to maintain as much of the code is closely coupled. Since the sizing of this project is relatively small, this won't be an issue. So let's look at some servlet code. As seen, I've created a controller called shopping cart controller, which extends HTTP servlet. Now by extending this, I have to implement two methods, the first being doGet and the second being doPost. But before I explain those, let's have a look at the initializer function. So this is another function that we can overload, and it runs when the controller is started up. So what it does is two very important things. The first being is that it creates our sax parser and passes all the XML data into Java objects. And the second part is that it creates our services such as search and paging. So we look down, we look at the doGet method. What this simply does is this calls the doPost method. The reason why we do this is that it's just much easier to have all the code in one method rather than splitting up into different get and post requests. So we look at the doPost, we see this action variable. So what this action variable does, it tells us what section of code to run. So if the action is null, we just want to go back to the search page, which is at the home page. If the action is search, the user has submitted a search query, so we go out, get those results, and return them back to the results page, and so on and so forth. So where this action variable comes from is, if we look at the search JSP, and we go into search form.jsp, we can see this hidden variable called action. So when the user submits a search form or search query, the form and all its parameters are passed to the controller, which includes this action variable. So this action variable, like before, will select the search section of code, get all those parameters, performs a search using those parameters, and returns the results back to the results page. So this is sort of the key element of what a controller does. So if we look down here at the very end, we have this request dispatcher. So what this request dispatcher does is that it sets the page that we want to go to once we complete this, once we've got processed all this data, and sends all the data that we're wanting to send to the JSP to that JSP. This then brings us onto search. In setting up search, this requires us to do four things. First, we need to set up the search service, which is where we will query our past objects. Next, we will have to create a search page for submitting search queries. After that, we'll have to create a results page for displaying those results. And lastly, we'll have to create a paging service. So this will allow us to move forward and backwards through our results. So in looking to the code, we start with the search service. So with the search service, we have this method called find entries. And what find entries does is that for each publication in our list of publications, compares the publication's attributes to the requested criteria by the user, and only if they all match, we'll add them to the list of results, which we'll return at the end. Now, with the second method, find entry, this is called when we only want to remove and add items from a cart. So we search by key and they only expect to find one result. So let's move on to the search.jsp. So here is the search.jsp file. So with the search.jsp file, we include our JSP headers at the very top, our custom JavaScript, our custom CSS. We have this header file, which is essentially the nav bar that we see at the very top. And we have this search form. Now with this search form, this is essentially what the user submits when they want to sort of query the database. So we allow them to search by title, author, publication, and school. So if you look at the demo, these fields are there. We also provide them the ability to search by additional fields, so things like editor, search by month. So these are the user is able to refine their search, and we are also able to remove these as well. So when we click the search button, what happens is that going back to the code, we submit this form by sending out a post. So going back to the shopping cart controller, this method is called, the action is set to search. So essentially we execute this piece of code. So we essentially pass our search criteria off to the search service through the find entries method. It finds our list of results, and then we set these results back onto the results page, which we call through the request dispatcher at the very bottom. So with the results.jsp file, this is very similar to the search.jsp. At the very top we have our JSP declarations, our JavaScript, our CSS, we have a header file, and at the very bottom we have our the results.table.jsp file. So in this file, this is where we'll be rendering each item. So for each item we render the title, and we render two buttons. The first button, which is the items button, so this will take us to a more detailed page about that certain item, and the second button is the add to shopping cart button. So if you look at the demo, we can see here's the title, we have the info button, so if you click through, we get more information such as the year, the publisher, the ISBN, and the author. And also we have this other button, which is the add to cart. So we click that, we have this little toast in the bottom, so lets us know that we've added it. So at the bottom of the results page, we see we have some paging. So we're able to sort of jump to the next set of 10 results, and then jump back to the previous set. So this is important for the user, as we don't require them to sort of scroll through a very long list of results. And it's also important for the developer, because first of all, it reduces learning times, and second of all, it makes the page a bit more manageable. So if you jump back to the code, this is implemented in the paging service. So with the paging service, we provide a list of results, and from this list of results, we either call the get next pages, which returns the next set of 10 results, or we call the previous get previous pages, so returns the previous set of 10 results. We also have this get current page. Now with the get current page, what happens is that if the user navigates away from the results page, say to the checkout page to check what they have in their the shopping cart, and then navigate back, it allows them to start where they left off. So this brings us to the final stage, the shopping cart. So given a list of results, let's add one of them to our shopping cart. So let's add relational database theory. So we'll click the add to shopping cart button. We see a toast appears in the bottom left hand corner. If you navigate to the shopping cart page, we see it appears there as well. We also have the ability to remove items from our shopping cart. So if we click the minus button, then our shopping cart should be now empty. So let's navigate to the code. So the process of adding and removing items from a shopping cart is all handled by the shopping cart controller. So if we scroll down to the doPost method in the controller class and have a look at the action parameter or variable, when we want to add an item to a shopping cart, we set that action variable to add, And when we want to remove an item from a shopping cart, we set it to remove. So in the case of adding an item to a shopping cart, we first check whether or not the user already has a shopping cart in their session, which we can check using the request.getSession method. So if they already have one in their session, we'll simply add that item to the cart, and if not, we'll initialize a new cart for them. So looking at the shopping cart bean, we see this is a very simple class. All it contains is a list of shopping cart items with methods to add to cart and remove from cart. So going back, let's have a closer look at the remove function. So in the remove function, we want to get the shopping cart from the user's session, which we do here, remove an item from the cart, and then we want to reset those items on the checkout page. So we don't want to show those deleted items on the page anymore. And then we forward the request to the checkout page. So if you have followed this video, you should now be confident enough to devise your own solution to the assignment, or have a better understanding on how servlets and JSPs work. Thanks for watching this video.